So if I can explain what we're doing, I think, if I remember rightly, next week we're going to be looking at engaging with spiritual experience, or I could retitle it Engaging with the Devil, but that probably, I'm not sure who I want to attract for that particular one, but we're talking about engaging with atheists, and it kind of seems really strange, but you'll see the sign up there, Solace. This is something I did years and years and years ago, and I worked a lot. I used to do a lot of debates with atheist societies when atheist societies were fashionable. I'm meant to be doing one with Newcastle University, but the Philosophy Society can't find anyone to debate with me, which I think is really funny. But they just can't. They're trying and nobody's willing to do it. But I got a message saying, the work that you're doing, can you write about it? So I wrote a book called Engaging with Atheists, which is still in print. In fact, I've just ordered another 30 copies, if any of you want one. Now, it's not really a book designed for atheists. It's designed for Christians who want to engage with atheists. Now, you have to be really careful here. So I was talking to Rachel beforehand, and I used to hate it. You know when someone comes and says something like, this is how you deal with Australians, and you're Australian. And I used to hate it when Americans would come and say, this is how you deal with Scots and Scottish culture and so on. And I think when you're coming from the perspective of somebody who's not what you're talking about, you have to be really careful. So please be patient with me on this. The Solace sign, by the way, Solace, well, what do you think that stands for? What's that? Safety of life at sea. Yes, that's true. It is that too. No. Solace is, it's a Gaelic word meaning sun or light. And we use that. Apparently there's a lawyer society called Solace, and there's a folk band called Solace, and there's an Islamic organization called Solace. But nonetheless, that was it. And we actually put the rainbow colors because that just wound people up. So that's the reason for doing that. So I'm going to go with this. I want to start with this from Steve Martin.
Oh, jeez. My little babies have all grown up. I listen to that song night after night, and I think, gee, religious people have such beautiful music and art, and atheists really have nothing. Until now. This is the entire atheist hymnal right here. A little tune called Atheists Don't Have No Songs.
Christians have their hymns and pages. Hava Nagilas for the Jews. Baptists have the Rock of Ages. Atheists just sing the blues. Romantics play Claire de Lune. Born again sing He is risen. But no one ever wrote a tune for godless existentialism. For atheists,
there's no good news.
They'll never sing a song of faith in their songs.
They have a rule.
The He is always lowercase. Some folks sing a Bach cantata. Lutherans get Christmas trees. Atheist songs add up to nada. But they do have Sundays free. Pentecostals sing, they sing to heaven. Coptics have the Book of Scrolls. Numerologists count, they count to 7.
5, 6, 7.
Atheists have rock and roll. For atheists,
there's no good news.
They'll never sing a song of faith in their songs.
They have a rule.
The He is always lowercase. Atheist.
have no songs.
Christians have their hymns and pages.
Hymns and pages.
Habanagilus for the Jews.
For the Jews.
Baptists have the Rock of Ages.
Rock of Ages.
Atheists just sing the blues. Catholics
Dress up for Mass.
and listen to Gregorian chants.
Atheists just take a pass.
Watch football in their underpants. Watch football in their underpants.
Atheists.
Atheists
Don't have no songs.
don't have no songs.
I think that's brilliant. And actually, it makes a serious point. And the serious point is simply this. And it's one of the arguments from beauty. That it is true that you will find, really, in general, atheists don't have songs. You know, and it's very interesting. I went to the Met Art Gallery in New York. And it was just fascinating. They divide the galleries according to centuries. So it's like pre-14th century, then the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th. Every single one of those was absolutely packed. And most of the paintings were basically religious paintings or landscapes. The 20th century was huge and nobody was in it. You could have played football in it. I just thought, yeah, it just made a lot of sense to me. And what I'm saying is this, it's an argument, we'll come to the argument, it's an argument from beauty. How do we know what beauty is? How does it work out? So, who are the atheists? Forgive, this is my friend Al who drew these cartoons. I have no idea. Some of them are a bit weird. Okay, first thing is this, functional atheists. So in reality, between 10 and 20% of people in Australia will actually be what we call theoretical atheists. They believe in theory. Functional atheists are different. Functional atheists are people who live as if there were no God. So it doesn't matter. You know, now we can use the phrase agnostic. Agnostic doesn't know. But actually in the church, there are lots of people who are functional atheists. They go away from church on a Sunday. And to be honest, there's no difference to how they behave on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from all their atheist friends. And I got to the point where I much prefer an honest atheist to a dishonest Christian. So that's where we're going with the new fundamentalist atheist. Now this is a little bit dated. So there were 4 people called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the atheist apocalypse. Does anyone know who any of them are? Richard Dawkins is one. Who else? Christopher Hitchens, yeah. No. Sam Harris was another one. And, I've forgotten his name. Daniel Dennett, yeah. Daniel Dennett was another one. I've actually heard all of them. But why I called them the new fundamentalist atheists was because it annoyed them. I got involved with a lot of debates on atheist websites, including Richard Dawkins. And they had certain beliefs that if you questioned those beliefs, they got really angry with you. And it was very easy for me to wind atheists up. Now, I've stopped doing that because it's not funny anymore. The death threats got too much. No. But I remember I was in a place in Cambridge, and I said, I'm really surprised that people get so angry about a God they say doesn't exist. So I said, look, I don't believe in the Loch Ness Monster. I don't get angry about the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. So I said, why do people get so angry? And this guy stood up. Now, it turns out later he was a professor at the University of Cambridge. And he yelled at me, what do you mean we get angry? We don't get angry. You're a complete idiot. And I couldn't believe it. I just stood there and I thought, Lord, please let it keep coming. And he ranted for 2 minutes. And then his friend said, shut up and sit down, you fool. You've just proved him right. And at the end, he came up to me and he said, look, I'm really, really sorry for doing that. And I said, no, please. Everywhere I speak, can you come and do exactly the same thing? Because you kind of prove. He said, maybe. He said, why do we get angry about something? You know. Now, let's be clear. Not all atheists are like that. But these fundamentalist atheists were. And Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, was designed to stir up all of that. So, I mean, you will find people who do get angry about their non-belief. Agnostic atheists, basically that's agnostics. They're people who say there's not enough evidence. I would believe if I had enough evidence. Now, you have to take that seriously, okay? Because that is actually a very fair comment. Now, I want to argue there's loads of evidence. The problem with agnosticism is that, how will I put it? You can have intelligent agnostics and stupid agnostics. And intelligent agnostics are people who go, I don't know, but I'm going to investigate. A stupid agnostic is go, I don't know and nobody can know and who cares? Well, that doesn't make any sense. There are things that are really important. I mean, I get a bit of hypochondriac about my health. And if I woke up tomorrow morning and thought I have a lump and I think I might have cancer, but I don't know if I do or not, the intelligent thing to do would be to go to my GP and say, look, I've got this. Do you think it's worth investigating? And it's the same with religion, because we're talking about life and death. We're talking about eternity. So it's really worth looking at, and it's really worth asking questions. I mean, some people ask too many questions. No. I tease Rachel, but I absolutely adore her because I've never met anyone with such intelligent questions, and sometimes she baffles me. Going, I have to go and think about this now. And yeah. But these are the people who are saying, I don't know. And we have to be able to say to people that there's a possibility that you could know. Right? There's a possibility. So it's worth finding out. Now, Christian atheists. That sounds like a very strange one. We confess that we are atheists so far as gods of this sort are concerned, but not with respect to the most true God, the Father of righteousness and temperance and the other virtues, who is free from all impurity. There's an argument that's used. So there's a whole bunch of arguments that the new fundamentalist atheists use, and they're all the same. Like, I can tell you the 5 verses that they will use in the Bible, and I can tell you the 10 basic arguments. And it's like they repeat them as though they're original thoughts, but because of YouTube and because of social media, these things come up a lot. And one of them is this. So this is Ricky Gervais, who's probably now the most influential atheist in his YouTube videos. And he sits, and he's done this in various people, but with, what's the American guy, Stephen, whatever his name, the chat show host? Oh, I can't remember. Colbert, yeah. So he's with him, and he'll say, because Stephen Colbert is a professing Catholic, and he'll say, there are 30,000 gods, I just believe in one less of them than you do. In other words, that you disown all these gods, you just say one, he says, I go one more. I believe, that there isn't, that God doesn't exist. Now, it's really fascinating. I discovered this. This is Justin Martyr, his first apology. Justin Martyr was 2nd century Christian. And he's answering the charge that Christians are atheists. We used to be called atheists. I know that sounds weird. Why do you think we were called atheists, by the way? If you've seen the Odyssey, you should know. No, you haven't seen the Odyssey. Okay, you don't know. Why were we called atheists? It seems such a strange thing. Yes, that's true. Go for it. Yep. So we don't believe in any other gods, but how was the belief in gods expressed, you see, in Greece? What did they do? What did they have? They had idols. Yep. So that's one thing. They also had temples. They had sacrifices. They had religious rituals. They had special food markets. And the Christians said, no, we're not doing any of that. And as a result, and that was so deeply tied into their life, people said, well, these people are atheists because they don't have priests, they don't have temples, and so they mustn't believe in God. And I think, well, for me, that's a very interesting aspect of things. So, what I'm trying to say is, the majority of people you engage with, and you might be this yourself, are people who either don't know there's a God, don't care there's a God, or think that religion is tied up very much like the Greeks, with priests and temples and churches and everything else. And that's how people think of religion. So, for example, when the new fundamentalist atheists started, I would always get this question, and I wonder how you'd answer it. Someone would shout out, "At least atheists don't fly planes into buildings." Now, how would you answer that one? What's the accusation being made? What's that? Yeah. Religious people do. And they put all religions together, and because they don't want to be seen as Islamophobic, they'll never say Islam. So all religious people get lumped together. Plus, in this city, as you well know, we had the tremendous scandals, I say tremendous, in like large, horrible, of the child sex abuse. And I've just been reading another book on that here. I mean, what went on here was absolutely horrific in Newcastle and in Maitland. It was horrific. And so people think that. I was standing out the church there one Saturday. No, it wasn't a Sunday. I was just standing out, and I don't even know who the woman was. This woman just shouted at me, "Pedo." Sorry, why? And when I was engaged in arguments with the fundamentalist atheists, I would be accused of that all the time. Well, you're a minister, so therefore, you're a sexual deviant. I mean, the harm that did was astonishing. And people, there can be a hostility that comes from that because they associate with religion. But going back to the Muslims don't fly planes into buildings, my argument was always, neither do Presbyterians or Baptists or even Charismatics are not that mad, And people would say, "Well, what are you trying to say? You're saying all religions?" I mean, the one great argument was the number one suicide bomber group in the world up until about 1990, maybe as far as 2000, was the Tamil Tigers, who were atheists. They were a secularist group. And before that, it was the Russians. It was Stalin who got his people to go and do suicide bombings and everything else. But people do that. They have this antagonism towards religion. And sometimes the antagonism, you need to be really careful here, because sometimes people's antagonism is in theory or something they've read seen on the television or read in a book. But for some people, and I found this the more I went on, the people who were really hostile were people who were brought up in a religious environment, including Christian environments, and who were abused, or in different ways. I don't just mean sexual abuse. I mean, they saw really bad stuff happen in the church. And when you hear some of their stories, you go, okay. And I think when you're engaging with people, it's really, really, really important to ask them about their story. Not assume. Don't assume. Don't come up with trite answers. It's always good to do that. So, I'm going to give some ideas here. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. I think that's the motto I would use all the time. 1 Peter 3:15. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you want to get really angry with people because they're, well, in my experience, I've experienced it a little bit, the hostile questions, the "why are you such an idiot" type questions. And I have to resist answering facetiously, but sometimes I do. And sometimes you actually do need to respond strongly. But nonetheless, here's the key. First of all, if you're a Christian, you revere Christ as Lord, and you've always been prepared to give an answer. And that doesn't mean you've got an answer for everything, because we don't. And I'm the kind of person who will always come across as having an answer for everything. But the more I go on, the more I realize I don't. But look at what's said here. Who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Okay. So what's going on there? Who's asking the question first? Yeah, or the non-believer at least. Asking, because of the hope that you have. How do they know? I mean, do you wear a t-shirt saying Jesus is my hope? How do they know? Through your thoughts, words, and actions, yeah? Because, yeah. It's... What's that? Your approach to life, I think. I think when people see how you behave, you see, there's a problem that Christians have when we say we're going to try and witness. Well, what are you doing? Are you like the Jehovah's Witnesses standing along the shores of Lake Macquarie with their signs, free Bible course, staring at people as they go past? Is that witnessing? Is knocking on the door witnessing? Is sharing a tract witnessing? The ultimate witness is living a life to such a degree that someone asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. Why are you like this? I remember I worked in or volunteered in a disability organization. And I remember one of the staff coming up and saying, "Why are you like this?" So what do you mean? He said, "Well, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do this." And, it was just a question. Or when I was in hospital and I was sick, I'll never forget this one. There was a guy came in because he freaked me out. He absolutely freaked me out. He was a doctor. And he was a Swiss doctor. And he came in with a nurse. And I was recovering. I'd been 2.5 months in. And he came into my room. I still had a separate room. I wasn't on a general ward. I wasn't that recovered. And he said to the ward nurse, "You can leave. I want to talk to David on my own." And he shut the door. And I thought, oh no, here we go again. The last time it was, I can't remember, a blood clot or something. And I thought, what's happened now? Please don't tell me I've got cancer or whatever. He said, "I've got something to ask you." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "What's the point of life?" I said, "What? Is that what you're asking me?" I said, "Sorry, why are you here?" He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "I'm medically to look at you, but I volunteered because I want to ask you." And he said, he told me about that they'd witnessed my family, how they behaved, that people were talking about us. And he said, "I've been in this hospital for 9 years. I'm doing really well. I've got a nice job, got a nice car, a nice house. But what's the point of it all?" I thought, wow. So, the point about it is that you don't need to artificially create opportunities. You shouldn't need to anyway, in that sense. Right, so that's where I'm coming with this engaging personally. You listen and learn. Listen to people. You learn a huge amount. A guy called Greg Kokel from the States, he says this: "The key to the Columbo tactic is to go on the offensive in an inoffensive way by using carefully selected questions to productively advance the conversation. Simply put, never make a statement, at least at first, when a question will do the job." Now, look, I'm not a great fan of methodologies, even as Mr. Kokel says, but his point is valid. Don't assume that you know what people think, because you cannot put everyone into a box. You can't put all atheists into a box. You'd be amazed at some of the histories that people have, and they're not telling you, and they don't have to tell you. But when asking questions, to me, shows you're interested. I think people's lives are utterly fascinating. I just find all kinds of people utterly fascinating. And I think when you question, you find out more. And then you think. And then you read. So I'm a big fan of reading, as you know. This is Einstein. So I was always told Einstein was an atheist. It's absolute rubbish. He wasn't a Christian, but he absolutely believed, said, "I'm not an atheist. I don't think I could call myself a pantheist." Now, a pantheist is someone who believes that everything is God. And people used to accuse Einstein of that. He said, no. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. It does not know how. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangement of the books, but doesn't know what it is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of even the most intelligent being towards God. Now, I think that's a brilliant description. And part of reading is I just keep finding things that connect with people. So I think reading is really good, or you might argue watching stuff on YouTube is the same. Yeah, it is actually. How did I get Steve Martin's song? I think I just came across it, or it could have been my son who's always coming up with these things. I think that's important. Communicate. St. Francis of Assisi is supposed to have said this: preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. He didn't say it. He never said it. It's a myth. But what's wrong with it? It's very simple what's wrong with it when you think about it. Exactly. It's as simple as that. How do you preach without using words? He never said it because it's a stupid statement. He's saying what people think he meant was if you go around to be kind to people, then they'll want to be like you, and then, but you still got to preach the gospel. You still got to use words. I mean, the way I would describe it is this. Imagine you're a young guy and you want to propose to your beloved. Now, there's ways you can do it without using words, but I wouldn't recommend it. You've got to have to say something, So communication is really important. And you need to think about how you're communicating, because this is really important for Christians, again, to grasp. Sometimes we think we've proclaimed the gospel when we haven't. People haven't understood. So I'll give you an example. We did a survey in Dundee around the area of the church. Much to our amazement, we discovered that 10% of the population were Muslim. And when they filled out the survey, it was really interesting. So the survey had questions. God is the creator of heaven and earth, right? Or the creator of the earth. And you could put 1 for strongly agree and 5 for strongly disagree. The Muslims, all 1. The Bible is the word of God. Amazingly for me, the Muslims 1 or 2 is what they put. But we had a question, Jesus is the Son of God. It didn't surprise me they disagreed, but it was 5, it was expletive deleted, it was outrageous, and I thought, why this really strong reaction? And I showed it to a friend who worked with Muslims, and he said, "Oh, Dave, you idiot." I said, what did I do? He said, "You've just asked these people if they believe that God the Father had sex with the Virgin Mary and Jesus was born." I said, "Well, that's gross." And he said, "Yeah, but that's what they've been taught, Christians. So you've asked them something. You think you're asking about the ontological Trinity or something, the virgin birth. They hear something different." And so that's where you've got to be really... Now, people might say, "Well, that means we can never communicate." Yeah, we can. But that's the listening to people. You've got to understand where people are coming from. Begin where people are and lead them to the logical conclusion of their belief. So, don't try and knock people down. So, for example, I remember a guy come into my room in university and he said, "Dave, I just believe that all morality is relative. You can believe whatever you want, and you can do whatever you want." And I said, "Okay, let's see where this goes." And we went one step, and he basically ended up agreeing with the Holocaust. So where does your belief lead you? What are the conclusions of where you're at? Because I'll tell you this, the one thing that really knocks me out about atheism, which maybe it's not fair and maybe other atheists would disagree with this, but logically, it's such a despairing philosophy. It's Dostoevsky's, if there is no God, then everything is permissible. There's a logical conclusion of our beliefs. Love people. I've seen some Christians seek to communicate the gospel, and they talk about love, but they talk about love in the way that, "I love you in Jesus' name, whack." It's not good. You really have to care for people. You have to weep for people. You have to be concerned for people. I cannot think of anything I would want more for anyone than for them to come to know the Lord. Not because it's a notch on my belt or whatever. Not because it's, "Hey, look, I was right after all." But because for me, it's the equivalent of seeing a starving child receiving a meal. It's the thing. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking for those of us who are friends and family who are not believers. It is heartbreaking. It's not because we want to be right. Believe you me, there are many times that I wanted to be wrong. I mean, the most traumatic experience for me was the death of my grandmother, because I didn't know whether she was a believer or not. I was pretty certain she wasn't, but I couldn't be certain. I mean, I went and I had to leave that with the Lord. And but you are genuinely concerned for people and you love people. You pray, of course. Because here's the thing, you can never convert anyone. I've long ago given up trying to persuade people or convert people. That's not what we do. I like discussing with people and sharing. And I pray that God will work in their lives. But you must pray for people. That's the most important thing of all of it. There's a phrase that says, it's good to talk to people about Jesus. It's even better to talk to Jesus about people. And use the Bible. Why be ashamed to use the Bible? A lot of difficulties that some of my atheist friends have are to do with the Bible. So again, I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, Rachel, but I love the fact that you ask the biblical questions. I love the fact you go to Bible study. And I love the fact that the questions you ask are real and are deep. And to be honest, at times are profoundly challenging. And sometimes I will come away and go, oh, that woman, and then I have to go and think about it because they're real questions, but you use the Bible. It's not your words that matter, no matter how clever you are. There's a man said to me once, there's no way I'm coming anywhere near you because you can persuade people of anything. I said, no, I really don't want to. I really don't. That's not the issue. You use the Bible. And then you leave. Stop nagging people. Let people be. Pray for them. I think sometimes, I just think before I became a Christian, I remember I had relatives who I really, really loved. But man, they annoyed me so much. The amount of times they kept trying to convert me. Give it a break. I heard what you said. Leave it be. You got to learn to leave things with God. And the other thing is, by the way, within the church, and what we're doing is, you give people an opportunity, but if people keep knocking you back, you shake the dust off your feet, is the phrase that was used by Jesus. I was doing door-to-door work once with a young guy, and we went to a door, and this woman came to the door and said, no, get lost, I can't stand Christians. And she slammed the door, and he went to the door, he got his shoes, and he went, and he dusted off his shoes. I thought, oh, that's a bit dramatic. But there's a sense in which it's not that you give up on people, but you just have to give people their own space in that way. And then we do it together. I would say, I know people talk about personal witness, but it's really the collective of us all. What's the purpose of all this? I'm not going to go into that because that's too much with it. Here's another one. We engage with the gospel. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. See, we need to keep being transformed. So, I'll make a confession to you. One of the big objections I've had to Christianity, the top 5, for me, and I would dread being asked this, and one was the book of Judges and what I perceived to be genocide in the Old Testament. I hated being asked that question. And I read a lot about it, and it took me a long, long, long time, but it wasn't until I preached through Judges here that I began to get a sense. And also, bizarrely, COVID helped me understand the Old Testament. Why? Because when we were in COVID, and I looked at the way that the nations were behaving and everything that was going on, I thought, there's nothing new under the sun. This is all here in the Old Testament. The Bible is so relevant. So, but your own thinking needs to be renewed, and that's one of the problems with presenting the good news of Jesus like a program, is it's not a program. It's a whole life thing. So, here's the things that are important. Evidence and faith. People say, oh, you don't need evidence, you just believe. Sorry, that's wrong. You do need evidence, because you've got to believe in something. And so don't dismiss the claim for evidence. Now, when people say you have to provide me with absolute proof, the reason that's wrong is because you can't do absolute proof of anything. I would go to kids in a school and I would say to them, I want you to prove to me that you didn't come into existence yesterday. And none of them could do it. You think, oh yeah, that's easy. Here's my birth certificate. Yeah, but that was forged. Yeah, but I've got all my memories. Yeah, they were implanted. Yeah, but my parents, yeah, they're lying to you. And you can go round like that. And so when an atheist comes and says, I demand 100% proof, absolute evidence, there actually isn't any for anything. I used to do what's the film, the Matrix? Yeah, I used to do the Matrix thing with people. And I would say to them, how do you know that you're in this room right now, listening to this mad Scotsman talk about atheism, and you're not plugged up to a machine which is filling your head with that stuff? How do you know that? You can't absolutely prove it, but you balance things out. And that's one of the challenges that has to come in. We can't demand absolute proof, but we can say there's evidence. I don't use the word proof. I use the word evidence. And there's a lot of it. The Bible, Abraham Lincoln wasn't a professing Christian, actually, but the Bible is the best gift God has ever given to men. All the good from the Savior of the world is communicated through this book. Yeah, okay. So I'd always say to people, read the Bible. I remember I did a talk in a library in Brighton, and it was very hostile. In fact, so hostile that the library stopped it. Because a guy stood up and said to me, first of all, I was in 2 minutes into the talk, and he said, "You are responsible for slavery." And I said, I shouldn't have said this. I said, no, not me, mate. I sold my last slave 2 years ago. And then that kicked it off, and they all started arguing and everything. But anyway, afterwards, I went out, and this group of young teenage atheists who were big fans of Dawkins, about 20 of them, came up to me, and this guy said to me, "I don't like you, don't like your book, didn't like your talk." I said, "Oh, thanks. Anything else?" "Yeah," he said, your question and answer thing, that blew my head. He said, "I just can't get round it." And then he said, "Anyway, the Bible's rubbish." And I said, "Really? Have you read the Bible?" He said, "No, but I know it's rubbish." I said, No, I'm sorry, mate, but that's a bit daft. How can you say that when you haven't read it? And his friends all said to him, "Oh yeah, you're a plonker, and yeah, you should." And anyway, they said, "Look, do you want to come for a pint?" And I thought, 20 militant atheists in a back street in Brighton, is this the way my life ends? And they were, we went, and it was fine. But anyway, he turned up at the church the next day. He said, "All right, how should I read the Bible?" And I said to him, "Well, please don't start with Genesis. Please don't use the King James Version and all this." And I gave him lots of advice. About a month later, I got an email from him. "Hi, Dave. I'm sorry, I forgot your advice." So I started reading the Bible. I'm reading the King James, and I started at Genesis, and I've got to Genesis chapter 38. And then he came out with this great line, "It's beginning to mess with my head. It's beginning to make sense." And I thought, wow. Look, read the Bible. It'll cause people to question. So many different things, but that's what we've got. Why people believe. You only believe in Jesus because you were brought up in a Christian community. If you were brought up in Pakistan or Iran or China, you'd have different beliefs. Well, duh. That's true for everybody. The only reason that you're an atheist is because you were brought up in an atheist community as well. I mean, you can argue that one round and round. And also there's the fact that people change. I remember a journalist came from the Times, and somewhat bizarrely, he was doing a series on religion in Britain, and he wanted to come and meet a Scottish Presbyterian, and I was on their books. So he came to the church. We had a communion, like this morning, and I said to him, "Please don't take communion," but he took it anyway. And then he came to the house, and then he was sitting in a room, and Annabelle was doing her wonders with about 15 people. And we were sitting, cooking them food, and we're sitting in this room, and he said to them, "You only believe, I know you're young people and you believe, but you only believe because you were brought up in Christian homes." And I said, "Okay, go around every one of them," because I knew their stories. And 12 of the 15 had not been brought up in Christian homes. So that really blew his mind. He still didn't give us a very nice write-up anyway. Tolerance and intelligence. This is David Berlinski. "The pagan cult was never more tolerant than in its tolerance. Without any qualms of conscience of poverty, disease, starvation and homelessness, of gladiatorial spectacle, crucifixion, the exposure of unwanted infants, or the public slaughter of war captives or criminals on festive occasions, of indeed almost every imaginable form of tyranny, justice, depravity, or cruelty." The point about this is this. We're tolerant of some things, and we should be intolerant of others. I'm going to be intolerant of racism. And this idea that somehow Christians are intolerant and atheists are tolerant, it doesn't work like that. Science. Vishal Magnawadi, always worth reading, especially The Book That Made Your World. An Indian who came to become a believer through looking at how Christianity worked. "Britain gave universities to India to set us free. The West is now giving its youth myths that can only enslave him. This is ironic because it was the West's quest for truth that birthed science." Science is not opposed to Christianity. People use that. That's an argument that you say, "Oh, I don't believe." Don, have you got that book? I wrote this book called The Dawkins Layers, Challenging Atheist Myths. And one of the myths in it is that science and Christianity are opposed. And on the cover, they got really annoyed at this because my designer put a whole bunch of creatures and the invisible pink unicorn. Because this was the argument that atheists use, fundamentalist atheists use. There's an invisible pink unicorn. And they're trying to argue for it. And I put this on the cover and they said, well, you've displayed the invisible pink uniform. That's blasphemy. It's just really quite funny. But the point is just simply this. Science is not opposed to Christianity. And sometimes you get Christians go, oh yeah, I don't believe in science. What are you talking about? When I got the doctor, I want the doctor to be a scientist. I'm sorry. I really don't want him to be a faith healer. I want people who build planes to know what they're doing in scientific terms and to understand aerodynamics. I don't want them to say, hey, I'm going to put this here and then just throw it off a building and hope that it works. So we do that. Reason or revelation, this is Bertrand Russell. Sorry, I'm not going to go there where he was, but he argued against it. He said you can't have revelation. Why not? Why can't God reveal himself? He can. The question is, did he? Freedom or repression. I want to be free. I don't want to be a Christian. There's a guy called Louis Namier who's an atheist. Hitler and the Third Reich were the gruesome and incongruous consummation of an age which as none other believed in progress and felt assured it was being achieved. Our society is turning away from its Christian roots. We're now beginning to see the effect of that. Without the roots, we don't have the fruits. And that's a powerful argument, I think. Again, Magno Vadi. The Bible is the only force known into history that has freed entire nations from corruption while simultaneously giving them political freedom. Again, I think that's one of the fruits that's so important. Good and evil. Marek Edelman, a Jew. Man is evil by nature, man is a beast. People have to be educated from childhood, from kindergarten, that there should be no hatred. See, good and evil, you can't explain good and evil by atheism. Dawkins says, in the atheist world, there is no good and evil. Well, that means if I go and kill a child, that's not good or evil. It's just neutral, which we all know is ridiculous. The argument of this book is that we and all other animals are machines created by our genes. Wow. Dawkins is now living in a world which he regrets having helped create. He says that. He now says that he's a cultural Christian because he doesn't want what he has produced. Jean-Paul Sartre, very famous atheist. I do not feel that I am the product of chance, a speck of dust in the universe, but someone who is expected, prepared, prefigured. In short, a being whom only a creator could put here. And this idea of a creating hand refers to God. How could he be an atheist? Because he fought against that. Anthony Flew, who was the most militant atheist, today I would say the claim concerning the resurrection is more impressive than any of the religious competition. Flew has a book called There Is a God, which he wrote just before he died. Dawkins and others lied about him and said he was forced to write it. It was ghostwritten, everything else. No. We engage with the gospel. We've got to deal with the question of suffering. You've got to deal with the question of heaven and hell and the alternative. I think the question of beauty is really important. Sorry, I'm just rushing through this because you can get the book. I think the question of community, as I've said, is important. I think the question of family is really important. Why does family have meaning? Equality and social justice, where does that come from? And all these things. And I've put down some books there. The Book That Made Your World by Magno Vadi. Why Trust the Bible by Amy Orr Ewing. God's Undertaker by John Lennox. By the way, John Lennox is coming to the end of his days. And he knows it. And there's a YouTube clip just now, which is stunning, where he says, I know I'm going to see my Maker's face. And it's just a 30-second clip. Is God a Moral Monster is a really important book by Paul Copan. If you're worried about the genocide thing, it's a heavy book. Is God anti-gay? Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Tim Keller's Reason for God. And then there's a couple of books by yours truly. Okay. So here's where I'm going with all this, and I'm going to leave you with a piece of music as we did when we came in, because I do want to finish on time. But just very quickly, any questions or comments? Because I realize I've shot through a lot of that fairly quickly. Yes. So that's the revelation or reason, Jim. That God. So it's Stephen. The guy who yells, Stephen Fry. and Ricky Gervais as well say the same thing. If God would only show us, then we would believe. But God has revealed himself, and he does throw in two ways. One is through the creation, the other is through the scriptures, and that includes primarily the person of Jesus Christ. So for me, I believe because of the creation, and I believe because of Jesus Christ. And that's it. But that's the revelation, you're right. You need that. You also need the Holy Spirit to work in your life to reveal as well. Did not our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures? So yeah.
If you believe that you have the reason for the hope that's in us, and you also believe that his sheep hear his voice, those two things together give you great confidence in sharing the gospel.
They do.
They do.
They do.
Because, and Jesus said, I didn't come for the well, I came for the sick. So, I don't think witnessing for Christ is so hard. And I do think you do get opportunities all the time. So if you drop a seed, we're not required to do much. We're just required to sow. He does the reaping. So just those three things, they give me confidence. I don't really have a huge part to play.
They should give you confidence. Because you do have a huge part to play, because God works through people. That's the point. And through all kinds of people. You don't have to be this brilliant evangelist. It's just normal things. And be amazed. I mean, I remember one young man saying, none of my family are Christians. I'm really disturbed. I said, well, your family have got a great blessing. He said, what's that? I said, you're a Christian. And God has placed you in that family, and who knows what will happen. Don't push it. Small things. This is a true story. I didn't believe this story was true, but I met the person concerned. There was a man who became a Christian because he was a milkman, and in those days, milkmen put the bottles out, came around and give your bottles. And he was quite intrigued that one door he went to, the bottles, the returns, the empties, were always shiny, sparkling clean. So one day he knocked on the door and said, why are you cleaning my bottles for me? Nobody else does that. And she said, well, I don't know. She said, I'm a Christian, and I just thought you'd like them back clean. And he started going to church and started, Or I think of my own dad. Can I just tell you about my dad? My dad was really shy about speaking. He thought he was a terrible Christian. It's one of the big issues I had to deal with him towards the end of his days in terms of his assurance of faith. He thought he could never witness to anyone. But I was speaking in a church once, and this man came up to me and said, are you Andrew Robertson's son? And I said, yes, I am. He said, I became a Christian because of him. I said, why? He said, I work in the distillery. My dad worked in a distillery after working on the farm. And he said, what got me was I went and looked at his locker, because there were millmen, and they just basically had a lot of spare time. And I looked in his locker where all the books were. They all read books. He said, all these books by this guy called Martin Lloyd-Jones, and my dad would read these, and he said, and then the other thing was this, on Sunday we got triple pay to doing a Sunday. It's when society observed the Sabbath, it was a pretty good thing. And when every one of us wanted that shift, triple pay, come on. He said, every time your dad got a Sunday shift, he gave it away because he wanted to go to church. And he said, and he went to a church where he heard the gospel and he became a believer. Well, that's it. In many ways, just live a consistent Christian life. Right. Yeah.
Did your dad know that story?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I told him, yeah. Because it was one of his friends at work, and he was very encouraged by it, But being my dad, he would find a way to also, yeah. Oh, well, how, but yeah, it was. Right. I'm going to leave you with this. So we did Atheists Ain't Got No Songs. I got sent this by somebody, and I thought it was so stunningly beautiful. I did want to share it. Some of you have seen it already if you listen to the podcast. But this is a kind of beauty that comes out of a belief in a God who is beautiful. And it's the Lord's Prayer in Latvian. So hang with it, and you'll see. Look at the faces of the people. I think it's one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen, and then we're done. Okay, let me pray. We'll stop there. Lord, we thank you for the great beauty that you have brought into this world. We thank you for the beauty in music. We thank you most of all for the beauty in Christ. Help us to see him and to love him and to follow him. In your name, amen.